Hi friends, welcome back to Liz's Reading Corner, or welcome if you're new here. I'm Liz and I like books, and today we are going to be doing my June reading wrap up. I have my coffee. I'm not going to spill it this time, unlike the great coffee disaster of 2024. It is really cold here, honestly, for Queensland. I know everyone who lives in any kind of a colder climate than Queensland is going to be laughing at me, but it is freezing here for Queensland. It's just so cold. We don't normally get temperatures this cold, and so I have had to actually break out my, even though it's sort of pushed back, my actual like really thick knitted jacket, and we have like our fluffy slippers. It is so cold, and it's a really dreary day today, so the lighting's not amazing. It's just been really overcast and honestly so rainy. We don't normally get weather like this, but it is absolutely wild to be just so cold. Loving it. Absolutely prefer it over the heat, but it is an experience that we haven't had for a very long, well, not a very long time. It's an experience we haven't had for a while. So yeah, it's a novelty. Back to the books. I managed to read 11 books in June, so it was a little bit better reading month for me, and I managed to get through 4,323 pages. That brings my total books to 66 out of 80, so my goal was 80, and my total pages is 25,808 out of 40,000 pages that I wanted to read this year. But it's like I've said before, it's just like a loose goal. If I hit it, cool. If I don't, it is what it is. I don't want the pressure that I had on myself last year to get through reading. This month I read mostly like medium-sized books, so 3 to 499 pages. My top 3 genres were horror, historical fiction, and thriller, which is good because I wanted to actually read horror. I was really in like the mood to read horror books, so that worked out really well. And my average star rating was 3.64 stars, so not the best. I think I only had one 5-star read, so honestly I think that it was actually higher than I expected for my average star rating, so not the worst. Okay, so the books that I read this month, like I said, I got through 11 books. So I read The Kingdom of Copper by Shannon Chakraborty. This is the second book in the Day of a Bad trilogy. This is me trying to get through the book series that I am in the middle of reading. I really quite enjoyed this one. It was not the same as the first, but it was a reread, so I already kind of knew what was going on anyway. So I gave that one 4 stars. Again, I gave it 4 stars the first time I read it. It's just as good as the first time I read it. Next, I read A Survivor's Account of a Depraved Funhouse by Thomas Stewart. This was my first extreme novel story book. I wanted to try and do like a whole week of reading extreme horror, and that absolutely did not happen. I got through this book, which was a bit difficult. This book follows 3 children who go to this funhouse, a supernatural funhouse basically, that appears once a year, and this time they're actually trying to find the master of the funhouse, and they do find the master of the funhouse, and it's wild. It's very wild. It does deal with violence again, like it is the premise of the book. It's basically Saw but in book form, and it's just violence against children. It is not just children, like adults as well, but the majority of it is like it's based around children. Like the main protagonist of the book is a child, so it was a bit difficult being a mother myself to be reading these things that these children are going through. But that being said, the writing was good, the story was good, it was very twisty turny, and honestly I enjoyed the writing and the story. I didn't enjoy the violence against the children, but it was actually, for what it is, a pretty good book. And so if you're looking to get into extreme horror, it would probably be a good book to start on. But extreme horror is just not for, like, it's just not for me. I'm not cut out for extreme horror. I don't think. I used to think I could, but no. And so I gave this one 4 stars. Next I read The Ministry of Time by Colleen Bradley. This book was a pleasant surprise. I went into it not really expecting to like it at all. I would say that I don't normally like historical fiction, but then I also love Temeraire, so maybe it's something that I'm starting to warm up to. This one is not just historical fiction, it's also sci-fi. Like, I would say it's historical fiction mixed with sci-fi, and it's very different. So like the main premise of the story is there is this ministry in England who uses they get given a time machine basically, and they use it to go back in time and get historical figures who have died in history. So they grab them either before they die, or like they basically disappeared within history, and they grab them and bring them to the future and see basically just what happens with them living in the future, and see if anything happens like to them or like to time and that sort of thing. Like I said, I was pleasantly surprised, and I actually really quite enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. I genuinely don't understand the hype around this series. I found the book really quite boring right up until the end. Like, the twist at the end is the only thing that saved this book. So I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read One Must Go by Alex Reed. This is another extreme horror story that I had borrowed from Kindle Unlimited. So it's on the KU store. This one, actually, I wouldn't even really class it as extreme horror. It's probably just horror. This one is set on Halloween, so it would be a good Halloween read. And it follows 3 children as they go trick-or-treating, and they meet this man who is I believe it's like an old god, who each year must have a child sacrificed to him. And he randomly on Halloween goes around and just chooses, or the year before he appears before the children, he chooses 3 children to compete against each other and to decide who is his sacrifice for that year. So again, this one deals in violence with and against children. This was actually, it wasn't terrible. The premise behind the story is actually really quite interesting. The writing is good, but I think it kind of just drags on just a little bit too long. So I gave that one 3 stars. Next, I read Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. I loved this. I have been obsessed with Hannibal Lecter since I first saw it when I was like a tween. So when I first saw the Hannibal Lecter movies, it also kind of helps that Anthony Hopkins is amazing as Hannibal Lecter. He just did a phenomenal job. So yeah, this is the first book in the Hannibal Lecter series. So there is Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and Hannibal Rising. Honestly, I was very surprised at just how close, not that I know this is meant to be about book reviews and things, but I was very surprised at how closely the movies copied the books in this, or at least for Red Dragon, because I could literally see the movie playing in my head as I was reading through the book. It was so good. And unsurprisingly, I gave this 5 stars. Next, I read A Botanical Daughter. This was one of my most anticipated reads for the year. It follows 2 men who live in a greenhouse. So you find out that one of the men is from a very rich family, and his house burnt down when he was a child, and when he was younger, and he just moved into the greenhouse and just decided to live there. And so he is a botanist, and the other man that lives with him, who is his partner, but no one's allowed to know because at the times it wasn't okay. He is a taxidermist, and so they live together in this greenhouse apart from everybody else. So the botanist finds this mycelium, or this fungus, and brings it back, or imports it back to where they live. I think it's England, and finds out that this plant has the ability to move things. They find out that one of the girls in the village where they live passed away. She is not buried on holy ground because she allegedly unalived herself. And so they go and dig up her body and bring it back and basically just use plants to try and mimic like the internal organs of a human. And surprisingly it works. The premise of this story was amazing. The whole idea behind a plant person being able to like get up and walk around and move and talk and just be a human basically, but as a plant, was really, really fascinating to me. It just, unfortunately, it just felt like this book was too long, and it was really quite short as it was. I think it was only like 350 pages or something like that. But honestly, this book just dragged on a little bit too long for me. And the writing, like there were some interesting bits throughout the story, but for the most part, the writing was just a bit eh. And it wasn't as exciting once I'd read it as I thought going into it. So that could also be just like I was hyping it up to myself, but unfortunately it was not as good as I was expecting, so I only gave it 3 stars. Next, I read The Unmaking of June Farrow. This was really popular on YouTube and on Bookstagram for a little while there, so I just wanted to see what all the hype was about, basically. It was interesting. The premise was a historical science fiction book, basically, that deals with like time travel and living between 2 times, basically. It was interesting, but it wasn't great. I think there was a lot of times when I was reading it where I was just like, is it ending yet? Like, it was another book that was just like a little bit too long for the story. So yeah, it held my interest long enough that I managed to finish it, but it's not something that I would probably go back to. So I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I read Sundial by Catriona Ward. I didn't realize that I had actually read this last year, so this was a reread, and I started reading through it and I was like, oh, I've actually read this before. Loved it as much as I loved it the first time I read it. I've loved, like, I think every single Catriona Ward book that I have read. It's unsurprising that I enjoyed this one and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read The Empire of Gold. This is the 3rd book in the Day of a Bad trilogy, so this means that I have officially finished reading the Day of a Bad trilogy. Honestly, this one was another book. I don't know, there was a lot of books this month where I was just like, this could have been done in like half the writing and it would have been better. Quite honestly, this book just felt like it dragged on way too long. It could have been that much like when I was reading the Del Toro Quest series, I just read too much of that same series too quickly. And so I think from now on, if I am going to be trying to finish those book series, I'm just going to be doing like 1 book a month from the series rather than trying to burn through a whole bunch of them. It was good. It was good to see how the series finally ends, but yeah, like I said, it was just too long for me, quite honestly, and so I only gave it 3 stars. And the last book that I read in June that no one will be surprised by, I feel like, was The Black Powder War. This is book 3 in the Temeraire series. I love Temeraire, obsessed with Temeraire. I'm going to be really, really sad when I finally end that series, which thankfully is not for a while because there's still like 4 books left in the series. So I'm trying to like space them out a bit more. I loved this book. This is not quite a 5-star read, not because it was like uninteresting, but it just wasn't quite as exciting as the first 2. But I do look forward to continuing the series, and I'm going to try and drag it out as much as possible because I'm not ready to say goodbye to Temeraire yet because I just love him so much. So those were the 11 books that I read in June. Have you read any of these books? As always, I would love to hear your opinion. Do you have any books that you think I would be interested in reading, or any reading challenges that you think I would be interested in doing? If you do, please let me know in the comments down below. If you like what I do here, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.